So, the Chinese Grand Prix happened, and it was the first F1 sprint weekend of the year. We had a sprint, a race, 2 different sets of qualifying. So a lot happened, and there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. And honestly, I probably don't know the answers to most of them, but this is my attempt at investigative journalism, I guess, and I wrote down 5 questions that I feel like need answers after this Grand Prix, and I'm going to go out of my way to attempt to answer them to the best of my ability. So, starting off, we've got what's next for Daniel Ricciardo. I mean, he's had an abysmal start to the season. Pretty sure he's finished above Yuki Tsunoda, his teammate, 1 time, and that was because of team orders. So, it's been pretty rough for him. And it's somebody who, after coming off of that hand injury, we were kind of looking at this as the make or break year for Daniel Ricciardo. If he does not have a really good, successful drive this season, he's probably not going to have a seat in Formula One at all, which is crazy because if he had a successful drive, it's really likely that he's the Red Bull driver. But now it seems like we're just adding insult to injury. Like I said, he's not finishing above his teammate. He's not performing at a super high level, and whether that's the car, whether that's him, now to add just on top of that, he's getting run into by Lance Stroll on something that isn't his fault and overtaking during the safety car, and all of a sudden he's got a 3-place grid penalty to start the next race in Miami. And that could just be a death sentence for him because of the fact that, do you really trust Danny Brick to go work his way through the field? And we're going to be, 6 races into this, and his best result's going to be still outside the points? And with, Lance Stroll falling off, Lewis Hamilton not being as fast as we thought he would be this year, I mean, is there a spot for Danny Rick in Formula One right now? I think that's a question we really have to ask, and honestly, the way that it's looking right now, I'm not sure that he's going to have a drive for next year. So I'm really hoping that he performs well. Obviously, a really fun guy to watch, a really fun guy just overall, and I'm hoping that he has a spot. Moving on to the next question, it's what does the future look like for Aston Martin? They had a really interesting Grand Prix in that their tire management was atrocious for Fernando Alonso. During the safety car, they left him on soft tires, which meant that he had to do a 2-stop when everyone else that was competing for points was doing a 1-stop, which essentially put him at a massive disadvantage. However, Fernando Alonso does what Fernando Alonso does. He was hyper-aggressive, worked his way back up into the points, put on medium tires at the end of the race, and had a series of amazing overtakes. Fernando Alonso just simply isn't the problem right now. It's everything else for Aston Martin. Like I said, their tire management was atrocious, and the biggest part of this is it really feels like this is a year where they could be the 4th best team on the grid. I mean, I don't think they're going to catch the Ferraris. The McLarens look to be picking up speed. So those 2 in Red Bull seem like the top 3 teams. But Aston Martin should be firmly in that race for 4th against Mercedes. Mercedes' car is the worst that it's been in years. It's extremely slow. Fernando Alonso might be the best driver out of those 2 teams right now. And they're still 12 points behind in the constructors. And it's just, do you really want to see them run it back with Lance Stroll? I mean, he has been abysmal to start this season. He's been really rough, and, it's a guy that you kind of hope would catch on, but it never seems like it's clicking for him. But that's a guy who probably should be on the hot seat, and you just don't feel like he's going to be. Lawrence Stroll is the owner of that team. He's an executive chairman at Aston Martin, like literally the car company. So you just don't feel like with him having that much say they're going to make a move. But if they did make a move, it feels like within a couple of years, when they've got Honda coming in as their new engine, if Honda's still as good as they've been with Red Bull, and Alonso, maybe Carlos Sainz, maybe, I don't know, insert second driver there who's competitive, you might be looking at a top 3 team on the grid. And right now, you're just not. And that's really, really painful for Aston right now. So, question number 3. I kind of brought it up with the Aston Martins. It's the fact that Ferrari looks to be falling behind. And are they actually falling behind? I mean, they had a rough race. They had a rough weekend. Their qualifying speeds were not where we thought they would be, which we kind of had a weird feeling they wouldn't be great, but we thought their race pace would be better. And their race pace was really bad too. I mean, you can attribute some of that to Carlos Sainz racing Leclerc during the sprint race, and maybe a little bit of racing with Carlos Sainz going on in the tire management. And there are a lot of factors, but it just feels like Ferrari kind of fell behind and got outclassed by an outstanding drive by Lando Norris. And I don't want to, discount Lando Norris, who was one of the fastest drivers in total, not named Max Verstappen, but you just really wonder, is it as much of a McLaren great drive from Lando, or is it more so Ferrari falling behind? And I really do think it's the former. I think it's a great drive from Lando. I think he got driver of the day for a reason, and I think he's been spectacular as of late. And I mean, he obviously got on pole in the sprint race, didn't really do much out of that. He had a really rough sprint, but that main race, he looked phenomenal. So I don't think Ferrari's falling behind. I still think they're the number 2 team, but I think when you combine that with question 4, we could be in for an interesting debate with what's going on with Ferrari. All right, so question 4. This one's an interesting one because it has to do with Ferrari again, and is Carlos Sainz being a bad teammate right now to Charles Leclerc? Obviously, they're in a really interesting spot, Ferrari, because F1's one of the only sports, especially of the ones that I watch, where a player or driver can know that they're not going to be with a team in the following season, yet be as good as Carlos Sainz is. Carlos Sainz has been arguably the second best driver on the entire grid this season, and he knows for a fact that he won't have a job with Ferrari next year. And that brings up the question, is he a bad teammate? Because we saw how he was racing Leclerc. We saw that was not, it was holding both of them back. He was hyper aggressive, almost pushed Leclerc off the track. There was a lot of fighting going back and forth. And Leclerc said himself that he feels like Carlos is racing him more than the other drivers. And that just brings the question, is he a bad teammate? But I'm going to be honest, I don't think so. I think that we're used to an F1 grid where so many of the teammates, it's a clear 1A, 1B kind of situation where one of them is better or worse than the other one. And I feel like Ferrari is one of the rare exceptions where, as much as we know Leclerc is their star and we know that they're building on him and we know that they're bringing in Lewis Hamilton to complement him, Sainz is almost just as good of a driver. And I think we're just not in a situation where we see 2 teammates that are this evenly matched on a good team. And we've seen what's happened with Ferrari in the past where these guys have raced each other. And I just think it's competitive racing going on. I think Carlos Sainz understands that this is his opportunity to go out and get his money and go out and prove to the world that he deserves a top seat. Maybe he deserves that second Red Bull seat. Maybe it's Mercedes. Maybe it's Aston Martin. Maybe it's Audi because they're probably going to come in with big money. But I think that's the point that we have to get to, is that Carlos Sainz isn't necessarily a bad teammate. He just, is racing for himself just as much as the team right now. And I don't think we've seen that in quite some time. Last question. This one is more of just an overarching theme with this race weekend. What's going on with the FIA? Those safety cars were hard to watch. I mean, Valtteri Bottas crashes. Not crashes. He has an engine failure. Moves off to the side, and we decide to stick at a yellow flag and I think maybe a VSC for a little while before we go to a safety car, despite him sitting there trying to work on the engine, and we know that he's not going to get back in this car and drive it. I have no clue what's going on there. Then we had the second safety car, which they held for what felt like way too long. It felt like everyone was saying, oh, there's no debris on the track, and they're just holding it forever. So it just seems like everything's dysfunctional there. I don't even know if that was much of a question, but it felt like part of that was hard to watch, especially the first safety car. Felt like they mishandled it really badly, and I have no clue what was going on there. All right, so that's it. Those were my 5 major questions. Obviously, I feel like there's a lot more to talk about. I feel like, where does Carlos Sainz go from here? Definitely something we want to talk about. I feel like there's just a whole bunch of questions and not a lot of answers right now. I did my best to try to investigate and talk my way through some of the really important events of this week, as opposed to, these traditional race breakdowns you kind of see. Wanted to come out with you with something a little bit different. So there it is. Hopefully going to be doing these more often. Hope you guys enjoyed. Please follow for more. The Graveyard Shift is pushing to become, one of the greats, and we're going to keep working at it. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.